The perks of company, not tailored naturally, of touching hearing things, of talking into screens. The curse of timely signs, it's hard work being kind. Flash your dough stream, purchase neoprene.
I've been really thinking about this. I've been really thinking about the people that Jolyon Maugham has been telling us about, the head honcho at the Good Law Project, who weren't making PPE. They were making completely different stuff. They weren't on the page of PPE provision. They had no real history of relevance to the coronavirus crisis. But as soon as the crisis emerged, they sniffed an opportunity to make a ton of money. And that, I think, is something that we could probably all do as well. You might be morally wary of seeing a global pandemic begin to unfold and thinking first, how can I make a serious amount of money from this? You would probably be morally wary of putting on the kind of margins that Private Eye with Richard Brooks and his colleagues and Jolyon Maugham with his Good Law Project colleagues have ferreted out, some of it based on leaks, some of it based on persistence, and some of it based, I think, on luck and talent. So you and me probably wouldn't, on a £250 million contract, we probably wouldn't think, well, let's try and keep £100 million worth of profit. Well, maybe you would, in which case, let's not fall out today, but come on, give your head a wobble. So you've got a £250 million contract off the government, which is designed to help people avoid or recover from a potentially fatal virus. I find that odd, the idea that you'd think I'm going to make 100 million quid. So loads of them did, and I mean loads of them did. And we may never get to the bottom of just how much of this went on, and we may never get the full picture of figures and people or to get to the bottom of how much of this went on. But the stuff that bubbles to the surface that I can both get my head around and confidently start the programme thinking I'll be able to explain to you is where we start our conversation today. So have a little listen to this. This is Matt Hancock and Annalise Dodds exchanging words in the House of Commons on Tuesday. And pay attention, because I'm going to ask you whether or not this smells as fishy to you as it does to me, because, of course, I'm not a man of business. I don't have various companies. I don't see financial, medical crisis, a health crisis unfolding on this planet and think to myself, how can I make a few quid out of this? Actually, I'll go to the break first, because Keith's got that look on his face. I'll go to the break first, then we'll come back and I'll play you some clips. But here is what I think has happened, and I could, of course, be wrong. I want you to tell me whether or not, if I stood up in the House of Commons and said I had never given Keith a contract, I never gave him a contract, it's a load of nonsense cooked up by my political enemies. There's no contract at all in that context. Never given him a contract, load of old rubbish. And then it turned out that I had, or my department had given a contract to a company that contained, and the contract contained a codicil that said, it is understood that this work will be subcontracted to Keith. Right, and that was redacted. That was the stuff that was originally made public. They blacked out the bit that said this business will actually be subcontracted to Keith. So the contract has been given to Ferrari Enterprises with a codicil on the contract saying it is understood that this business will actually be subcontracted to Keith. Now, you don't know that the contract contains that line that says this is going to be subcontracted to Keith, right? I stand up in the House of Commons and know that the only thing in the public arena is the bit that says this is going to Ferrari Enterprises. No mention of Keith. There's a bit blacked out. You know that it's blacked out, but you don't know what's underneath it. I stand up in the House of Commons and say it's absolutely outrageous that people are accusing me of my pub landlord didn't get any contract whatsoever. It's an outrageous slur. Labour are desperate. And then it turns out that Keith is my pub landlord. I just don't know whether or not this is as egregious as some people are claiming and as just sort of morally wrong, if not legally wrong. I don't think there's any claim that it's legally wrong. It just feels wrong to me. But remember, I've got amazing levels of buyer's remorse with Matt Hancock, so I may need your help in giving my head a wobble and seeing things straight. I'll show you the receipts after this. And we'll be joined by Jolyon Mon from the Good Law Project in about 10 minutes' time. We might break our record today for not taking a call. I wonder if we'll get all the way to 11 o'clock. It's practically a Steve Allen tribute act this morning, this programme. But this is important stuff. I'm only asking questions, and you need to see some of these receipts to understand why those questions strike me as so important. So here is Annalise Dodds in the House of Commons effectively accusing Matt Hancock of giving a contract to his former pub landlord, a chap called Alex Bourne. And you'll remember the picture of them both looking very chirpy and happy. So this is about 2 minutes and 20 seconds long. Pay attention, because I will be testing you on it shortly.
Is she really denigrating the efforts to get hold of PPE? And does she not also know the history, which is that the Labour Party also put forward proposals, and Labour Party members and Labour donors also helped in that huge effort to get PPE?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm slightly surprised to hear the Right Honourable Member wish to draw attention to what took place in this regard. No, because I will respond to his point. He said, was I aware that Labour MPs and others were making recommendations? I'm absolutely aware, because we were all trying to do that to ensure we had the best response. But the difference was they were not entered into that VIP lane, and one can see this in the list of firms which was recently published. So if he wants to state that amongst that list there were Labour MPs' names rather than those of his Conservative colleagues, he must have been looking at a very different list to me.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to set the record straight on this, and I hope that after I speak, she will withdraw these comments and the Labour Party will no longer use this argument. Because the contract with Excalibur Healthcare, which is run by a Labour donor, was introduced from a Labour MP through me. And the man, a very good man who runs Excalibur Healthcare, in fact helped launch the Labour Party Science Manifesto in 2005. So now she can withdraw the allegations, and what she should say is a big thank you to everybody who helped get PPE when it was so badly needed.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I really regret that rather than taking responsibility, stating that the system will be changed for the future, instead we see an attempt ultimately to rewrite history. It's not myself stating that Conservative-related actors were more likely to obtain contracts. It's the National Audit Office which pointed this out.
So that's a bit of background for you, and the claim that he had done nothing at all himself to, or specifically the claim that his pub landlord had not received any contracts. This is where, for me, and again I'm only asking questions, this is where for me it gets really interesting, because this is what happened yesterday.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Right Honourable Member for West Suffolk intervened on me to, in his words, set the record straight over whether one of his constituents secured a contract from the government related to the COVID-19 pandemic. He said that claims of such a contract were, in his words, a fabrication pushed by the Labour Party and a load of nonsense. Yet today, the Good Law Project has published evidence indicating that a company called Alpha Laboratories won a contract worth over £40 million from the Department for Health and Social Care in December 2020, and that this company appears to have subcontracted all of the manufacturing of goods to another company, Hinpack Limited, which appears to be run by the Right Honourable Member for West Suffolk's constituent. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to seek your guidance as to whether the Right Honourable Member for West Suffolk should return to this House and himself set the record straight by withdrawing the comments he made in this place yesterday.
And the Deputy Speaker described it as a matter for debate, which some people were unhappy about, which I think technically is probably correct. So this is the question, and you can come at it using either your moral compass or your knowledge of business, right? And if we make any mistakes, then Jolyon Mon will set us straight, or indeed if you are so minded to do so, you can. So when he said in the House of Commons that no contracts had gone to Bourne's company, his old landlord's company, Hancock, he was, in a way, telling the truth. Because if you look for the contracts that Bourne's company won, you won't find any. But then it gets, I think, really interesting, because if you look for another company called Alpha Laboratories, which did win a contract with Matt Hancock's department. It won a contract worth £40,480,000, right? Look, I'm going to level with you. Sometimes when we talk about stuff like this, I think, that just can't. I must be missing something, because this is so out there. And then you think back over some of the things that have been out there over the years and realise that, no, it's probably not impossible. But if you look at the Alpha Laboratories contract, you will see that it says this: Alpha Laboratories agrees to subcontract the manufacturing of the goods to an entity which is blanked out in the original contract before publishing. I'll read it to you. It's paragraph 7.3, subcontract. The authority agrees and acknowledges that the supplier will subcontract manufacture of the goods to, and then a blacked out word or words, and that it shall be deemed to have given consent to such subcontracting for the purposes of clause 28.1 of the Call of Terms and Conditions. And then it emerges that the blacked out bit in that contract is Hancock Limited, which is the company that is owned by Matt Hancock's old pub landlord. So when he said that he hadn't given a contract worth tens of millions of pounds to his mate, he was technically correct, but the contract was given to a company that was under starters orders to give the manufacturing side of it, a fat slice of the business, a fat slice of the pie, to Matt Hancock's pub landlord. Now, I'm going to open up the phone lines, and I'm going to ask you essentially one question, but I'm going to point out that you could come at it from a number of angles. I'm not stupid, right? And I've got buyer's remorse with Matt Hancock, and the more I learn about some of the stuff that went on in the context of handing out these contracts, the more disgusted I become. But I'm like everybody else sometimes. I can't leave my biases at the door. I can't leave my knowledge and experience at the door. And I'm also a bit of a wuss, in the sense that I don't want to live in a country that looks dodge. I just don't. Whoever's in charge. I just want to believe, perhaps naively, that we live by slightly higher standards than others. So you can either come at it from the angle I'm coming at it from, which is, what do you reckon about this then? 0345 6060973. Or you can draw upon your knowledge of business. And in recent months, I've been very blessed on this one. I mean, in recent years, in fact, I've been very blessed. It's why we invented the Ray Liotta, with people who really, really live in the world that we are discussing. I'm like a tourist. I'm like a tour guide, okay? And you're on the top deck of my open bus, and we're driving around the world, and we're happening upon issues, and I'm swatting up on them just before I'm handed the microphone. So, look, some days I'm a bit of an expert, as Daddy Pig would say. Other days I'm not. I'm swatting up on them before they hand me the microphone, and then I'm sort of, all right, hello? Can you hear me at the back? Everything, yeah, okay, thank you, okay. And now here we find ourselves outside the Colosseum, and I give you a bit of chapter and verse, and then someone in the back of the bus puts their hand up and says, well, actually, I was one of the architects of the Colosseum, and I'll be able to give you a bit of a... So I've been very blessed on that. So if you're in the business of supply and demand, if you're in the business of contracting and subcontracting, if you're in the manufacturing world, if this is your turf, your home turf, I'd love to talk to you as well, because I just feel that we're sweating the little stuff at the moment. If someone's telling you to get upset about a statue and they're in charge of a country, I can't help wondering what it is that they're very, very, very keen for you not to be looking at and not to be thinking about. If someone's telling you to, get upset about wearing a face mask and they're sitting on the front bench of a government in the House of Commons, there's a little, maybe I'm weird, but there's a little bit of me that thinks, why on earth are they trying to get people to talk about statues and face masks and footballers? Which, of course, have been big, big issues over the last 18 months. So if you're in business, speak from a position of knowledge on 0345 6060973. And if, like me, you're a bit of a spectator at this circus, then just share your thoughts on whether or not this strikes you as something that in your world, in your field, in your experience, just doesn't sound right. And I'm not going to be patronised. I'll tell you that now. Oh, you don't understand how. I'm not going to be patronised for the reasons that I explained at the beginning of this hour. So the people that end up in charge of these sort of things, they're not brighter than you. They're not cleverer than you. They're better connected than you, and they're possibly a little less possessed of conscience than you. But we're not dealing with masters of the universe who understand complicated algorithms in a way that we don't. We're dealing with people that see a global pandemic, see an opportunity to make money, get their contacts book out, and then phone their mates, it would seem to me, in the world of politics. So, phone lines are open. You know what to do. The number you need is 0345 60 60973. I may have a little look at what Jess Phillips had to say on the Peston programme last night, because that seems very pertinent to me as well. But I really, once we've picked Jolyon's brains in a moment, I really want to pick yours, okay? So get in the queue now, and I relish the opportunity of learning from you, because, as you've probably gathered, this to me is almost like an undiscovered country. Now, I am not a professional ornithologist. I occasionally, among many other subjects, report upon the work of professional ornithologists. So if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I am not qualified to tell you that it is incontrovertibly a duck. Luckily, Jolyon Maugham is a qualified ornithologist, or at least he is an esteemed lawyer and a Queen's Counsel, no less. He's also the top man at the Good Law Project, to which you just heard Annalise Dodds referring. I'm tempted just to say over to you. So we take up the story. It's like one of those whodunit podcasts, this, isn't it, Jolyon? We take up the story with Matt Hancock saying that they'd done absolutely nothing wrong in response to your revelation that the name of his pub landlord's company had been redacted from the contract given to the company that was subcontracted to give the business to the pub landlord's company.
Yeah, so let's just take this from the top. Matt Hancock's publican is a guy called Alex Bourne, and his company is called Hancock. What Annalise Dodds says is that Hancock didn't get a contract. Annalise Dodds says that Hancock got a contract with the government, and Matt Hancock says that's wrong. Well, Matt Hancock, I think, is wrong to deny that truth, because if the government gives a contract to person A and stipulates that the contract is to be subcontracted to person B, then government has given a contract to person B. And
why would they do that? Why would they not just give it directly to person B? And I'm possibly tempted.
And that's exactly the point, actually, because the only real difference between giving a contract to Alpha Laboratories, which is the company that the Department of Health actually contracted with, and giving a contract to Alex Bourne's Hancock, is that government has to publish the name of the person to whom it gave the contract, Alpha Laboratories, but can redact, can blank out, can obscure from your knowledge and my knowledge the fact that it is required Alex Bourne's company to be obscured, that it has required Alpha Laboratories to subcontract the manufacturing to Alex Bourne. So the only difference between contracting directly with Hancock and contracting with Hancock through stipulating Alpha Laboratories has to contract with Hancock is obscurity. Matt Hancock's department gets to obscure from your knowledge and my knowledge the fact that it is given a contract to Matt Hancock's publican. And that's pretty disgraceful, really.
How did you, if this is even a word, how did you unobscure this fact?
Well, if you look at what government has published, and published only after we sued them and won in the High Court.
That's quite important. Let me pause. Let me pause you there, because you're obviously a lot better versed in the ducking and diving of the last few months than I am, or my listeners are. The only reason that the contract containing the redaction or the blacking out ended up in the public sphere is because you'd gone to court to get your hands on paperwork like that.
That's right. So the law is very clear. You have to publish stuff. There are very limited opportunities for you to blank out embarrassing bits. Government was very, very slow in publishing and was blanking out lots of embarrassing bits. We went to court to force them to speed up, and we won. And so they published a whole bunch of stuff that they would not otherwise have published, or would not otherwise have published quickly. I don't recall whether this was one of those contracts,
right.
But what you can see if you look online is that Department of Health has said nothing to see here. We've given a contract to Alpha Laboratories, and Matt Hancock says there's no contract between the Department of Health and my publican. But we obtained from someone I'm not at liberty to disclose a copy of the contract without the embarrassing bits blanked out. And without the embarrassing bits blanked out, what you can see is that Alpha Laboratories was required to subcontract the manufacturing of the test tubes that were being sold for more than 40 million quid to Matt Hancock's publican. So what you've ended up with basically is a ruse, a device, a stratagem to obscure the real supplier. The real supplier was Matt Hancock's publican. And that is really bad. It's bad that 40 million quid for the supply of vials went to a publican. That's bad. And what makes it worse is that you have contractual arrangements that look to have been designed to obscure who the real identity was of the real contracting party, benefiting from more than £40 million of public money.
I should say that Robert Peston's also got hold of the original contract, and before coming a Lord High Panjandrum of political journalism, he cut his teeth for 20 years in business journalism, and he had some very coruscating comments, coruscating meaning sparkling, but of course also very critical comments on this precise issue on his television programme last night. I'll share those when I've finish with you, Jolyon, because there are, I suppose...
You'll never finish with me, James.
Well, I mean, for now, obviously. I mean, for now. Two things, really. I mean, if I was one of Scooby-Doo's assistants, and I mean, you're the meddling kid here, I think, because the question, how could they have hoped to keep this quiet, or if what you are describing is completely accurate, because, I mean, they clearly have obscured information, but we can't know for sure what the motivation for doing it was. It is, I think, a recurring theme in your recent work that they just never thought any of this would come out.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the first occasion on which this has happened. So there's another contract that I've talked about quite a lot, a £252 million contract with a company called Ianda. Originally, that contract was going to be entered into by the box fresh £100 company of a guy called Andrew Mills, who was an advisor to Liz Truss. Now, I think she's still Trade Secretary.
Home Secretary.
Was certainly
Foreign Secretary. Yeah.
Foreign Secretary now. And she was an advisor to his, and so it might have been quite embarrassing for him to have won a £250 million contract. And so that contract instead was entered into with a company called Ianda, with which he had no public connection. He, Andrew Mills, Liz Truss's advisor. But we found on his LinkedIn that he was a consultant, and we began to pull at that thread, and what we uncovered was that originally the contract was going to his company, and then it was passed very late in the day to Ianda. So, but for us seeing that LinkedIn entry, we would never have known who the real contracting counterparty was, that it was somebody very closely connected to the government. So exactly the same story there as here. And my fear, indeed my belief, is that those are two examples of where we've managed to get to the real contracting counterparty, but there are many, many others. And that this stratagem that is being pursued of obscuring who is really feeding at the public trough is a very widely used stratagem, but we'll never get to find out because government does not like transparency.
And the, I suppose, well, I'm interested in the work that they're doing on judicial review, but I think I'll save that for our next conversation, because the margins employed here, I'm told by my contributors who have more experience than you or I in the world of manufacturing and supply, the margins are close to unbelievable on some of these contracts. The amount of money that we know made its way into the pockets and bank accounts of some of the people you've mentioned, none of whom, I should stress, are accused of criminality, and all of whom insist that they've done absolutely nothing wrong. The margins are mind-boggling.
Well, a really extraordinary feature of the VIP loan, one that hasn't really come out yet, is that government internal documents said that you could be paid 25% above the price that other people were being paid without quibble. Now, that information was quite widely held in government. It was on official government documents. And you would think that government wouldn't tell people, look, if you bid 125 rather than 100,
yes,
you'll get a
course.
contract anyway.
Yes.
But it's perfectly straightforward to imagine that ministers or ministers' offices or special advisors would have told contracting counterparties who are politically favoured that if they offered product for 100 million and made a sort of 10 or 20% profit margin, instead for 125 million, they'd be treated in exactly the same way. And I would not be remotely surprised if some of these politically connected VIP lane winners of vast public contracts had that information, put their contracts in at higher prices, won those contracts anyway, and got very, very fat, exploiting the pandemic whilst tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people died. And I feel pretty sickened by that, frankly.
And less importantly, while many suppliers with perhaps more experience and more obvious credentials in this field couldn't even get their phone calls returned. Final question, is there any, are you aware of any reasonable rationale for the original redaction? I mean, the circumstances in which it would make perfect sense for the company to which all of the business is being subcontracted not being mentioned in the contract with the company that's doing the subcontracting?
None at all. As I say, there is no real economic difference between giving it to Alpha Laboratories and insisting that Hinpack make it and giving it to Hinpack. What government has done is used redactions as a way to mask its embarrassment at the cost of transparency, and I think that's very, very wrong indeed.
And do we know whether Alpha Laboratories took a slice of the financial action before the subcontract was?
We don't.
Okay.
I mean, it would be pretty surprising if Alpha Laboratories agreed to do it for nothing. But we don't know how the 40 million quid was split.
Well, I'll let you get back to work. Jolyon Maugham, thank you very much indeed. Jolyon from the Good Law Project, whose website contains details of their work, including details of how you can support it. I'll share with you what Robert Peston had to say last night in a moment, and then I'll throw the floor open to you, because it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, but and Jolyon Maugham thinks it's a duck. I think it's probably a duck, but I'm not qualified really to comment on such matters. If you've got better qualifications than me, then give me a call. Tell me whether or not it is a duck. It's the redaction that's so interesting. The only reason that Jolyon Maugham can think of, or certainly one explanation for why the name of Matt Hancock's pub landlord's company would have been redacted from the original contract, would be to obfuscate or cover up his involvement. If there are other explanations for why that may be, I, for one, would love to hear them. Robert Peston, who describes himself as having been a business journalist for donkey's years, and indeed he was, chiefly at the Sunday Telegraph before becoming a Lord High Panjandrum of political broadcasting, said last night, "I've seen the contract and it says in the sub-clause that Alpha Laboratories would buy all the vials off Bourne's business," Bourne being the pub landlord, "and it's on the face of the contract, and I've got to tell you, as a business journalist for donkey's years, it is just inconceivable that the Department of Health was not aware that the subcontract was going to Bourne. It's inconceivable." So how can you say there was no connection with you and that contract? That's it's worth watching that to see Matt Hancock's face at that point in proceedings. And Robert Peston, I think, unlike me, is an ornithologist. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then with his decades in business journalism, he is qualified to determine and decide on the question of whether or not it is a duck. And fair play to, I must give this a proper name check, Rudy in Edinburgh, who describes it. It's not just a duck, James, it's a cluster duck. Adam is in Falmouth in Cornwall. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
Very well, mate. I'm bloody relieved to have a caller on. I'm not going to lie to you. We nearly broke the record there. Fill your boots, Adam.
I was chomping at the bit because I've been waiting for this kind of conversation to be had. And I work in sales. I was a regional sales manager for a very large fluid power and engineering company in the UK. Okay. And when the pandemic hit, there was a kind of a bit of a gold rush, I'll be honest. As you can imagine, people trying to buy up and sell masks, aprons, gloves, safety wear. And to be honest, it was a sort of circumstantial gold rush. Let's face it. Now, I was kind of we had a buyer in China who was a full-time job was sourcing products at the time across all industries, and prices were going up as demand went up, as you can imagine, and container prices were going up threefold. So prices were increasing, but the biggest problem I had with all of it was that there are some really good manufacturers of PPE in the UK, right? Some really, really good guys, really good customers of mine as well as suppliers of mine, and they were massively overlooked so this massive opportunity for people to make money. And
what do the margins look like to you then? Because this is not my world. I would have thought, and it's a bit naive to think, it's a global pandemic. They'll probably shave their margins a bit for the public good. I know you're laughing at me already. I might have done that, and everyone else in the room would be laughing their heads off at me. But what do these? So on a £252 million contract, for example, not far shy of 100 million quid's worth of commissions.
Jesus Christ! I mean, I'd have been
language, Timothy.
I'd have been
language.
very happy with that. I'd been very happy with that.
Yes.
No. I mean, look, to put it bluntly, I did a deal with a local food company, quite a big employer. They had 40,000 sets of nitrile gloves in different colours, right? And it's quite a small order, but I would be very happy with 20% profit on that.
And that's for the business. That's not just for you. That's a
GP for the business. Yeah, gross profit for the business. And on those sort of quantities, if you're talking millions, you could be down as far as 10 to 12% and still be fairly happy with that.
Well, of course you would. Well, I'd be happy with 1%.
Yeah, so when you're talking 100 million off 252 million or whatever it was, I mean, that is just... to be honest, when there are people struggling to put food on the table during a pandemic, and there's people giving contracts to their mates, allegedly...
Or civil servants giving contracts to the mates of the politicians, and Private Eye have done great work on how the civil servants felt pressured to do that. So there's probably just enough distance for the politicians to claim there's been no actual wrongdoing, because leaning on a civil servant to answer the phone to Chummo over there is not the same as answering the call from Chummo over there and handing him this contract in a box with a big ribbon on it.
And one last thing, just before I go, I all along, when there's people being furloughed from these massive companies that are in the UK, sent home from work because there's, free money available, let's face it, and these contracts are being handed out to X and Y, there's massive questions that need to be answered as to the ethics behind that. And there's people that were really struggling.
And the biggest question becomes, why would they block it off? Why would they black it out? And again, I stress, there may well be a perfectly plausible and reasonable answer to that question. The company that got the contract was on the public record. The company that got the actual business was removed from the public record, blacked out with a great big marker pen, and it's only emerged as a consequence of a leak to lawyers and journalists. 10:57 is the time. Thank you, Adam. Stephen is in Mill Hill. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Good morning. It's been a while since I've been in business, but when I did business with large companies, there was always a clause in the contract that said you cannot subcontract without written consent. That became I would be fairly safe in saying that's the norm.
The norm, right? Yes, not the law, the norm. It's an important distinction to make. Because otherwise you're going to be paying more than you need to pay without knowing that Chummo, who you've given the contract to, is paying the fellow over the road to do it and just keeping a little bit of the money for himself for literally doing nothing more than introduce you to each other.
Well, yeah, but going back to where I was, I think my customers were worried about quality rather than that. They wanted to be sure they knew where it was going to be made. They knew the quality of everything that went into the manufacturing process. So while they could keep an eye on it, they knew what they were doing. It wasn't a problem because subcontracting wasn't an issue.
Sure.
If they gave a contract without that clause in it, to me, if you ask that lawyer chap who you were speaking to earlier, if you were to speak to him, I would suggest that he would have dereliction.
Yes, but again, nothing criminal or illegal, and these were emergency circumstances. So there was a suspension, for example, of tendering. So it's not unlike.
There's a standard contract. It was a standard contract, and however much of the emergency in there was, we understand that. You can buy a contract online.
Yes, no, I don't doubt you for a minute, but I know that the emotional response from government is we were saving lives, as if that would justify absolutely any corners being cut, and that the legal defence would be that no actual laws were broken, and the sort of defence that straddles both the moral and the legal stools would be that it was an absolute emergency, so we had to move faster than we can when the proper regulations.
So what? There is such a thing as what is considered a standard contract, and I would venture to say that it would have that clause in it.
Standards is what you're describing, actually, Stephen. I'm going to move on because I'm going to hit the news on time, but you're just describing the normal way of doing business is there to guard against sharp practice and or corruption. Suspending the normal rules of doing business because of an emergency situation is not implausible or necessarily wrong. But what you have to be able to do subsequently is go over exactly what happened and work out whether any sharp practice and or corruption had been smuggled under the radar as a consequence of lifting the normal regulations and restrictions because of the emergency. Whew. I still understand almost everything that has unfolded in the last hour. I just stress again, the redaction seems the crucial point, and there may well be many perfectly reasonable reasons why the name of that company, owned by Matt Hancock's pub Landlord, was blacked out. We'll stay with this story for a little longer for reasons that will soon become clear. Well, one is fairly obvious. I've only had time to take 2 calls so far because we've been going over the chapter and verse, but the other reason will become clear imminently. More questions surrounding contracts awarded to companies with little or no track record, you might say, in the relevant field, or with apparent connections to members of government. And we've been talking about Alex Bourne, who used to run a pub close to Matt Hancock's former constituency home in Suffolk. There is a now very widespread photograph of Matt Hancock and Alex Bourne at that pub, the Cock Inn in Thurlow, and he revealed that he'd initially offered his services to the UK Health Secretary several months ago by sending him a personal WhatsApp message. At the time, Bourne's company Himpact was producing plastic cups and takeaway boxes for the catering industry, and it ended up supplying about 2 million medical-grade vials a week to the government via a distributor contracted by the NHS. We now know, of course, the identity of that distributor, but the contract had the identity of the subcontractor redacted, and the subcontractor was Himpact, the company owned by Alex Bourne. And I'm delighted to tell you that Alex Bourne joins me on the line now. Alex, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there. How are you?
Very well, mate.
Good. Yeah, no, I just wanted to clear up a few points that Jolyon had brought up with you. Predominantly, I think the thing you're discussing is how or why was it necessary for me to appear as a subcontractor for this particular piece of work.
Just to clarify, and I will give you plenty of time to set the record straight, but the key question, I don't know how much of the programme you heard, is why was that redacted?
I don't know. I don't have anything to do with that.
That is the central thrust of what we're talking about, but I'm happy for you to put your side of events on the record.
Yeah, so I don't know why they did that.
Well, just quickly, let me ask you whether you've got any theories. Why do you think they might have done that?
I don't know. I honestly, genuinely don't know. I had nothing to do with the contracting between the Department for Health and Alpha Laboratories.
Does it strike you as normal that a contract would have a subcontractor redacted from it?
I don't know. I have never...
No Scooby-Doo at all about why they might have removed the identity of your company from the published official government contract?
You'd have to ask them. I had nothing to do with it.
I'd love to. Can I borrow your WhatsApp access?
You could, yeah. I mean, but
anyway, enough from me. Let me listen to you now, Alex. Fill your boots.
So the point was, first of all, why... Jolyon Maugham's point is that this was clearly to obfuscate the fact that I had been given the work and I had an association with the Health Secretary, which he insinuates actually led me to getting the work in the first place. The simple fact is, the reason I had to be a subcontractor was because I'm not on the NHS framework, which is a requirement to provide the NHS supply chain with laboratory consumables, which is what we were producing.
Yes.
So I wasn't. Those are the civil service procurement rules, and at the end, it is cut and dry. They just will not let anybody sell things to them. There are lots and lots of different companies who went through distributors. You have to do it that way. Distributors don't make anything.
Yes.
They simply buy it from one company and sell it to their own customer.
What was their commission? What was Alpha Laboratories' commission on the £40 million contract? How much of that did they take?
It's all commercially sensitive, and it's not for me to say, and it's also subject to ongoing discussion. So I can't tell you anything of that. The point you're asking, or the point you're trying to make, is that Jolyon Maugham trying to make is, was there political corruption involved in the award of this contract at any stage? And the answer to that is quite simply no. When I contacted the Health Secretary to begin with, and the reason I did it, quite simply put, is I had a passing association with him some years before. I hadn't spoken to him for 2 or 3 years before that. And when the PPE crisis was going on, one of our machinery manufacturers happened to make mask-making machines as well. And I simply messaged him, having got his phone number from a next-door neighbour, and just put it to him. I said, we can help if you would like it.
Had you ever sold any PPE at that point to anybody?
No.
And you were chiefly involved in the production and sale of plastic cups and pizza boxes?
Yes, I was. We were a manufacturer. So
and then you got in touch with Matt Hancock to offer him PPE?
Yeah, because quite simply, we were, there was a call to action, and industry was asked to support the process.
With respect, they didn't ask the pizza box industry for help, but cometh the hour, cometh the man, Alex.
Yeah, but there are plenty of companies who were not part of the medical consumable supply chain who got involved.
And a lot of them seemed to have personal connections to senior politicians, which is not an insinuation, is it? That's a matter of record. And it describes you.
But there's an association with a senior politician, and there's a passing acquaintance with one, which fundamentally, and this is where the record gets set straight. I contacted him about PPE. He said, "Great to hear that you're trying to help. Please message my West Suffolk email address," which I did. I then got a reply from his office which said, "Go on to the public website, effectively like everyone else, and put your details in there. If you're needed, someone will contact you." I did that, didn't hear a bean back, and that was the end of it. I didn't get involved in PPE masks. And we basically said, we're a manufacturing company, we have the ability to design, we have the ability to make things, and we have expertise in large-scale production.
Had you ever sold medical-grade vials to anybody before?
No, but these aren't medical-grade vials, they're IVDs, which is a slightly different kettle of fish.
Had you ever sold those to anybody before?
No. But the point is that...
So just for the record then, you had no experience or background in... No, I will. Well, of course I will, and then I'll ask the question.
Yeah, so the quality management systems and the methodology and actually the machinery that produces the kind of thing that we end up producing, which was test tubes and saliva collection funnels, which we actually designed from scratch, are almost identical. The regulation was covered by a specialist that we brought in to do it. We were authorised by the MHRA. We received our ISO accreditations, and after a vexatious complaint, we were investigated by the MHRA, and they said our standards were well above average.
Oh, no one's disputing that. All I'm interested in is whether you had any track record at all of selling test tubes or saliva collection funnels to anybody ever in your life.
No, but then again, we're in an unprecedented situation. I don't see the relevance of it necessarily. I understand your point.
Yes.
Why is this guy doing it?
Well, I've spoken to people who... I'm just so that you know, because I'm sure you're far too busy to listen to this programme on a regular basis. I hear frequently from people who had a lot of relevant experience in precisely and specifically these areas of provision who couldn't get arrested by the Department of Health and certainly didn't have WhatsApp access to the Secretary of State. But, I mean, I don't think anybody listening would blame you. I don't think anybody...
Correct.
Oh, but forgive me, carry on.
No, that's not correct in this instance. People, I mean, there was an industry group where it was everybody from a one-man band to AstraZeneca who were being asked, what can you do to help? How can you, what kind of things can you produce? There were massive supply chain issues, obviously. Suddenly, the world requires all at once, 1,000x what was produced ordinarily. And as a result, we were all pitching in doing things. If people had the product available, it would have been bought. I'm absolutely sure of it.
That's touching, but not true. I've spoken to people who had ventilators that were available.
I wasn't dealing with ventilators.
No, I know, but we're talking about the supply chain in general now. It's perfectly plausible that there was nobody in a position to provide test tubes or saliva collection funnels until you started manufacturing them for the first time in your life. I know it's commercially sensitive, but the numbers are correct, are they? The contract itself was in excess of £40 million.
Yes, that will. I mean, it's a matter of public record, yeah.
What was your turnover the previous year?
What, the previous financial year?
Yeah.
It was just under $250,000.
So would you mind saying that again?
Just under $250,000. But again, this is I don't. Do you want to talk about the actual issue at hand here, which is what Jolyon is talking about?
Again, it's a radio phone-in. The topic of conversation is defined by the presenter, so you knew that when you rang in. So what was the profit on that £40 million contract?
Zero, actually.
You didn't make any money at all?
No. Okay. I mean, this is the point. And the facts of this case... You've
said that on the public record now, Alex.
I know and have. Don't worry. I'm very aware of what I'm doing.
Okay.
The fact is that we set out to do a good thing. We offered up our services, and we had to pivot a business that had fundamentally lost everything overnight, along with a lot of people. But I determined not to do nothing and try and offer any help I could. The case that's been put forward at the moment is quite simply that Matt Hancock has behaved in a corrupt manner, and I have... No
one has used the word corrupt except you.
No, you absolutely have. I mean, you've been talking about corruption for the last half an hour.
No, possible corruption. No one has said that Matt Hancock has behaved. I mean, this is semantics, but for the record, I certainly haven't said that he's behaved in a corrupt manner.
Okay. I think a lot of people would disagree with you, but the point is...
Luckily, it's recorded.
I've received work from the Department for Health as a result of my association with Matt Hancock, when Matt Hancock had absolutely nothing to do with it. I hadn't even spoken to him about what we ended up manufacturing. So that is the question then, is why did your company, with its track record in plastic cups and pizza boxes, get the call back when many other companies that didn't have any connection at all? We weren't called by the Department for Health. What I did was I put on the supplier portal the fact that we could make some plastic consumables for labs. I read in the newspaper that the head of the British Institute of Biosciences had said that there will not be a chance of hitting the target in testing capacity because the consumables simply don't exist. So I then I effectively put my details into the supply chain online portal, didn't hear anything back, and so I started attacking it in a different way and started going around all the distributors who sold products predominantly for people from abroad. And then up came the three melons, and the contract arrived. I know you've already answered this question, but it is by far the most interesting element of the story, and I'd nudge you towards perhaps just a bit of speculation. And I register I'd like to thank you on behalf of the country for all the hard work that you've done in this field. But why do you think they removed the name of your company from the contract? I really don't know. I can only assume go on. That it's something to do with some form of confidentiality in civil service rules or commercial confidentiality, because... And if it isn't, I mean, what would be left then by way of... Because Alpha Laboratories' name is all over the contract. Quite right, but the thing is, I'm personally not bothered about admitting that I've had anything to do with it. When I was phoned by the journalists this time, a year ago, I told them everything that had been going on. I've never hidden what I've been doing. I don't think no one's accused you of anything, actually. It's more they have indirectly, haven't they? Because I don't think so. By the insinuation that because they're implying that Matthew Hancock has somehow manipulated the civil service to make provision for us to provide... Manipulated is quite a strong word, but the redaction is the key here, Alex. What is the charge, then, if it's not that? What is the charge? Influence might be the word. Perhaps it's a lot less harsh than manipulation. But the key question that neither of us can get past, but it's important, I think, that you understand this. You're familiar with the phrase, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. So why did they hide it? That's why I'm here now. So why did they hide it? I have no idea. Well, there you go. So that is what journalists do. Okay, well, that's great. But the point remains... That is the question that we need an answer to. That's the question that taxpayers, of whose money £40 million made its way into your company, they deserve an answer to. But no one is accusing you of anything. Well, they are, because if they're accusing me of lobbying Matt Hancock to make sure that I get a contract doing something that I'm not... But if you did a bang-up job for Britain, that doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things, and when the dust settles, there'll be absolutely no case to answer. But the case to answer at the moment is, why did they keep the name of your company out of the public eye? If they've got nothing to hide, they've got nothing to fear. And we're agreed. It's very hard to come up with a reasonable answer to that question. But we're united, Alex. We're united in our hope that there is a reasonable answer, I think, to that question. You might think that issue is the only one that matters. Or I can tell you for free that when you've had your name bandied through the press, with political wrongdoing, having tried your absolute best and utmost to do what you could for the nation at the time, and I'll refer you to the first email I ever sent to Matt Hancock, which said, I'm not looking to make my millions from this. I'll quite happily work for the government and associated agencies for free for the duration of the pandemic because I wanted to do something decent. My background...
And I applaud you, and I do stress...
No, please let me finish.
Of course, you
please
carry on.
Finish.
Of course.
And then to be referred to as the pub landlord, which, by the way, is one of the most immensely snobbish things I've ever heard, as if a pub landlord couldn't be capable of doing this kind of thing.
But you were a pub landlord, just to be clear.
Yeah, I am a pub landlord.
Okay,
but the point is, I stood up and I
in.
did something during a difficult time.
Yes.
And having your name dragged through the press when I haven't done anything wrong, nor is Matt Hancock in this instance, and I can absolutely stand... I'm looking forward to going to whatever official inquiry there is, because I've kept every message and every email revolved.
I stress again, no one's accused you of actual wrongdoing. There is just a lot of questions to be answered about why some companies... No, let me finish, Alex. I gave you the same courtesy. There are a lot of questions to be answered, and they're not to be answered by you because these decisions have nothing to do with you, about why some companies ended up in possession of these very lucrative contracts. Companies, for example, that went from a turnover of £250,000 to excess of £40 million as a direct consequence of a single contract via government through an official distributor. There are a lot of questions around why some companies ended up in receipt of contracts like that, while many other companies didn't. That's all. That's all that's happening here.
That may very well be the case.
And you can't answer that question, and no one's expecting you to.
Well, what they then need to do is go and find companies who have received contract as a result of influence.
Absolutely. No, nothing to do with influence.
Just told repeatedly.
Just the question of why. Yes.
The only reason there's a story is because 5 years ago, Matt Hancock came to open the pub as the local MP, and a now NHS nurse took a picture of us behind the bar and he put it on his website.
Well, no, because the story didn't end there, did it? But I mean, luckily, we've established over the course of the last 15 minutes that the sequence of events that followed on that felicitous photograph. Are you happy, Alex Bourne, that you've had an opportunity now to put your side of the story?
No, I'll just leave it with this. I mean, this idea that politicians, particularly, in a very, very difficult time, and people who are politically motivated as well.
Yes.
I understand for the importance of the examination of public life and the need to make sure that probity is observed at all points and that things are fundamentally carried out in a correct and decent, proper manner. But what I cannot cope with is the fact that we, as a company, have been used as a football in a game between political parties. No matter how much I've tried to speak and give my side of the story properly to people, it's either been misinterpreted or misrepresented, particularly by people like Jolyon and Maugham, and I'd just like to thank you for having me on to give my side of it.
It's my pleasure entirely. For the record, I'd like to clear one thing up as well. My grandmother was a pub landlady, so there's no snobbishness whatsoever involved in me using that
I didn't say it was from you, James.
descriptive phrase. No, I'm just clearing it up for the record. It certainly wouldn't have come from me. Alex Bourne, thank you.
Thanks, all the best to you. Bye-bye.
And I think it would have been a little inappropriate to give Alex Bourne there a Ray Liotta, which is a special honour we reserve for contributors to the programme who are especially qualified to make their contribution. But I think all the facts are out there, and I shall leave you, as ever, to arrive at your own conclusions. But that question of why remove the name of the company from the contract remains a particularly interesting one, to which Robert Peston, in a previous life a doyen of business reporters, remains particularly puzzled by. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. So, obviously, that's driven a bit of a coach and horses through what passes for a plan on the programme today. Thankfully, we've got Mystery Hour coming up at 12. I was drawn to the conversation about Christmas parties at Downing Street that we misjudged yesterday. I don't know why. I genuinely don't know why. I'm not usually backwards in coming forwards with stories that paint the political establishment in a poor light, but I felt that the Mirror's revelation was a bit cold, as in food, you know, a bit, and then I spoke to a couple of people who were drawing upon the memories of the privations they suffered during that particular period where we moved from Tier 2 to Tier 3, and I felt embarrassed by my original judgment, the idea that people would have moved on from the knowledge that they couldn't spend their last Christmas with a loved one, or they were in the freezing cold looking at their newly born grandchild through a patio window, while employees of Boris Johnson, colleagues of Boris Johnson, were having a right old knees up in government property. It does actually seem remarkable. So we may nudge on to that a little if there is an opportunity to do so, although just a sort of catalogue of fury and criticism can get a little wearing. I wonder whether there is an answer to the question of why you would redact the name. It was interesting that Alex didn't have any more idea than we do. If there turn out to be commercial confidentiality reasons for it, then one would imagine that Matt, or Matty even, Hancock, would have shared them in the House of Commons yesterday. And it leads me back to the question of what strikes you as significant or interesting about this remarkable saga, which has taken a turn even I wasn't necessarily expecting. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. So if you hit the numbers now, 0345 60 973, and either do a bit of a post-mortem with me on the conversation you've just heard. It's one of the rare occasions on the programme where I don't know if it qualifies quite as genuinely breaking news, but events over which other members of the media will be picking very, very carefully landed on your doorstep by dint of the radio programme that you tune into every morning. So what did you make of it all? 0345 60 973. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I thought he seemed like a nice chap, actually, albeit caught up in events that have spiralled remarkably out of control. And the accusation of perceived wrongdoing or cronyism or even corruption is never really levelled at the people providing the goods. It was levelled more at the idea of civil servants being lent on or politicians exerting influence to ensure that companies run or owned by people with whom they had a connection got looked at preferentially. And I'd refer you back. I don't know, did we put it up on the website, my interview with Richard Brooks from Private Eye? I refer you back to that and the multi-page report that he wrote on that issue to establish just how widespread that practice seems to have been. David is in Buckhurst Hill. David, what would you like to say? Have we got David in Buckhurst Hill? The number you need is 0345 6060 973, and we can either return to the question of redactions and commissions, or you can share your thoughts on that slightly unexpected exchange with the man at the very heart of the story we began the programme discussing. John is in Norris Green in Liverpool. John, what do you reckon?
Morning, James.
Hello, John.
I listened to that quite intently. I think there's some questions. Yeah, there's some questions that aren't being asked, and Alex couldn't provide the answers also. My first question would be, who actually wrote the contract initially and under what instructions? Because the contract is very specific.
I'm more interested in who rubbed out the bit than who wrote it originally.
Exactly, and so we need to find out who wrote it.
No, right, I can answer part of this, and it's I think it was one of the things that Alex Bourne was keen to establish. You need to be on a sort of approved list, an approved distributor.
Yes.
So that's like your middleman. So there's nothing suspicious necessarily about that element of it. What is suspicious is the redaction. So the contract would be fairly standard, but I don't know whether the subcontracting or the redaction is standard at all.
Yeah, I agree with you, and the redaction comes later on. But when you go back to the initial contract that was wrote for the main contractor, if you want, who wrote that contract that wrote in that they must subcontract to a specific company, which leads to the second question. At the time, on that list where Alex said he placed his information, who else was on that list at that
these
time?
are the key questions, aren't they? But again, they don't cast him. Did you feel sorry for him during that conversation? It sort of caught up. I mean, admittedly, having a company that goes from a turnover from £250,000 to 40 million quid in a straight year doesn't have anyone reaching for the violins. But he did sound like a man more sinned against than sinning.
He did, but also he didn't make a penny, according to him.
Yeah, well,
that's
easily checked.
Yeah, I was going to say on the on Company's House on the return.
No, I don't. He wouldn't say it on the radio unless he was confident he could back it up.
He could prove it.
But it's the redaction. It's the redaction all day long, isn't it? Why on earth would you rub it out from a contract that would allow these questions never to have been asked?
Yeah, and somebody must have done it. There had to be somebody physically doing it. Under what instructions and for what purpose? That's the question. And I did feel sorry for Alex, because Alex, he's a businessman. He was just sort of business. It sounds like he was genuine. It sounds like he saw that we were in dire straits. We were in a difficult time, a pandemic we'd never experienced before. He thought, I can help. That's fine. However, if I was a company that had been dealing with the NHS for the past 10 years, who were trying to get through to the NHS to say, listen, we've got all this stuff ready to go, and yet somebody who had never experienced it before, who we'd never tested before, who we'd never placed targets or looked at their accounts before, could suddenly
and we
gain
have heard,
a
yes,
£40 million contract.
And while other companies are struggling to get the phone picked up, and again, I mean, it's not his fault, but it is certainly the element of the story that intrigues me, and of course Jolyon Maugham, the Good Law Project, the most. I forgot to show you one of the receipts that underpinned this morning's entertainments. So here it is from the Peston programme last night and featuring Jess Phillips.
What an absolute load of rubbish. Did anybody else's friends get a contract? Mine didn't. None of my friends are on those lists. And the reality is, oh, you know, you don't remember what it was like. Well, I do remember exactly what it was like. And there are PPE providers in my constituency that had lorries driving in from Italy to take it when I was trying to get through on those lines that were given to members of Parliament. And so I watched lorries take personal protective equipment out of my constituency while my care homes were ringing me and asking if I could go to the local school to borrow goggles. And all the while, oh, we don't know what it was like. Well, I remember also filling in endless contracts for charities for victims of domestic abuse, where I've got all the notes of how I helped them and every single bit of rigour that they had to go through to get any public money, that somehow Randox doesn't have to qualify by the same rules. Oh, I remember what it was like in the heat of battle.
Yeah, so the fact that it was hard to get PPE is absolutely right, because the whole world was trying to get it. And actually, on those who got the contract, you know, there were donors to the Labour Party who got
we
those
were
contracts
trying
too.
to get that stuff. The owner of that company in my constituency was trying to get it into the government. I had endless phone calls. We were having those phone calls with the Cabinet Office. It's funny because they were already a provider. However, some people's friends who weren't providers somehow managed to get through the line.
25 to 12 is the time, the Peston programme on ITV last night. Back to your thoughts, and covering a whole gamut of responses, I suppose, to the questions we began the programme asking, and then rolling on to the questions posed by the conversation that we had with Alex Bourne, who I am going to continue to describe as a pub landlord, because that is how he came to know Matt, or as Alex calls him, Matty Hancock, and I suppose the unfolding story. 11:36 is the time. David is in Buckhurst Hill. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm in finance, so whilst I've been a long-time listener of your show, we haven't always seen eye to eye politically, but always enjoyed the debate. Listen, I'm despairing with what's going on, and less so with Alex's company, but more so with what's going on generally with the government. In finance, we're bound by very tight code of ethics. So you have to literally sign a legal document saying what you can and cannot do, who you can deal with. Importantly, you have to your point about the importance of redaction, you have to absolutely disclose, right? Because whilst there's always loopholes and ways around everything pretty much that's in legal paper, you know, you have a moral obligation or duty, hopefully, that you won't misuse that or mistrust that. And two, you really, you have to disclose, you have a legal obligation to disclose your dealings.
How much mileage is there? And it may be that neither of us are really qualified to comment on this, but how much mileage is there in it was a massive emergency, we had to suspend the normal rules of engagement?
Personally, I think that's all hot air.
But it was a massive emergency. I mean, neither of us are going to argue with that.
Absolutely right there. But I still don't think that the tender process or whatever process the government has to go through should be compromised. Or if it is compromised, then I would expect people who make the laws of this country to be whiter than white and actually err on the side of not going to one of their friends for a contract. I certainly, as I went back to the moral obligation, that's certainly where I would put myself. I'd actually want to not, the possibility of actually claiming myself in that manner, even if it was in the best interest of the country. I would make sure that, I was distanced from that. So that's my concern. And look, I think it also goes back to a fear of consequences. We've seen time and time again politicians actually, brazenly flaunting rules and being able to put a positive spin on this and be able to sort their way out of this. Then the next event comes along and sort of brushed under the carpet, and everybody moves on. So I think it's that fear.
It seems to be a little. I think it seems to have gone a little further in recent years, even perhaps in recent months, than they had while we were growing up, or while what we'd have called normal service. I think, and whether or not this particular episode turns out to be part of that process, we'll have to wait and see. But it is, of course, not that long ago that there were attempts to essentially rip up the rule book for parliamentary standards. And, not that long ago. It was literally within a month of today. 11:39 is the time. Paul is in Tottenham. Paul, what made you pick up the phone, mate?
Hi, James.
Hello, Paul.
First of all, thank you for the work that you do. Just wish we had more like you.
They do pay me, Paul. It's not a chance. It's not volunteer. I'm not volunteering to it. But thank you. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate it.
Not enough. We need more people like you, James. Thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Keith would disagree. For the record, Keith's shaking his head very disappointedly at this contribution. But you carry on.
The guy, what is his name?
Alex.
I heard all of that call that you did with him. Now, a couple of things that kind of stick in my throat. Now, I am also an importer and exporter of various goods. I can also supply my clients with PPE if they want some. It's not something that's hard to find. You can get it fairly easily. In the time of the pandemic, when it first kicked off, yes, it was very hard to get. It was extortionate prices. That is true. But when you're dealing with people in the Far East or in the EU or in America, they want payment up front. So if you've got this £40 million contract for goods, the person that's making them wants funds before he starts making them, or at least a deposit. So someone, out of the goodness of their heart, stumped up £40 million, or
you mean
even,
the sort of seed capital? Well, we don't know the chronology, and I understand why your nose is twitching, but I did come away thinking that and this may just be my excessive niceness kicking in and making me sound a bit naive, but he sounded like a man who had acted with good intentions, but who has found himself caught up in a maelstrom of claim and counterclaim, and the numbers are, to me, pretty spectacular, but I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, the sense of natural justice that he felt had been overridden, because he's clearly adamant that he'd done nothing wrong. And I found that element of his contribution to the programme quite persuasive.
It was, but yes, okay. But the thing is that when you are doing such a thing, say, you're buying goods and then you're selling them on for a profit or for no profit. Sure. You're still risking your funds.
No, I do understand the point you've made. Wrong, I completely understand the point you've made.
He's ordered face masks, for example. He's ordered face masks.
Well, it wasn't. He's manufacturing stuff, so he'll be ordering raw materials.
Okay. Right. So then when he receives his raw materials, if they're not of the standard required, then he's got inferior goods. So
he could have bought a pup. He could have bought a pup, but I don't know whether the contracts would deliver. I mean, that's the chronology of it, isn't it? That's what I mean by the notion of not knowing enough about it. Is it? Forgive me for asking you this. Is it a bit of a dark art what you do? I mean, is it something that if you sat down with Keith for an hour, could he set himself up doing what you're doing by tea time today? Is it one of those businesses that is
that simple?
Wait,
no, it's not that simple.
All right, that's what I was asking. Well, no, I did. That casts Keith in a bad light. Keith's very, very clever. Let me make that absolutely clear.
I don't doubt his brains. But for example, you could be looking for, I don't know, rolling pins. And then you order your rolling pins, and in the end, when your shipment arrives, you've got a sand.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be bad.
That does occur. That's happened to me in the past.
And that's why contacts are so important. Contacts and trust.
It's not that is it easy? What's easy?
Good question.
Nothing is easy.
No.
Nothing is easy. It's a bit like common sense. There's not a lot of it around.
That was yesterday's show. Contacts and trust then become even more important the more complicated things get. And that gives me...
But then...
Go on.
You've also got the logistics. Let's say you ship these over and the container falls off the ship and it lands into the ocean.
Yes.
That's gone.
Yes.
So that's your money gone.
Yes, and that does happen.
So you and it does happen. Or if it's coming in by road, let's say your container's hijacked, it does happen.
Yes. Yes, I know. Well, these are the risks. I mean, there's always risk involved in business. But I just want to nudge you, if I may, towards one final question, which is your contribution, whether intentional or not. I don't think it's controversial. When you talk about the possibility of bad luck, being played by bad luck, or being ripped off, or ordering a lorry load of rolling pins and being delivered a container full of sand, that makes the notion of personal connection even more important. So if you're in a period of emergency and you are... I mean, the problem is, of course, that none of these people were qualified in the field that you work in, but they thought that they were doing good by, taking calls or responding to emails or putting someone in touch with someone who they once met in a pub and he thinks he can help us with this thing. Is there any room for sympathy at all there by the idea that with a personal connection comes trust, and with trust comes a little bit more confidence that you won't be sent a lorry load of sand instead of a truckload of rolling pins?
Well, of course, if you've got some trust there, then
there you go. I mean,
that's going to help. But
then why redact it?
But you're still, you're still going to shell out £40 million to not make a penny. If something goes wrong, that £40 million is at risk.
I can see. I completely know. I understand why you're sticking with that bone. I really do, because you, as a businessman, are looking at the investment and the potential return and the risk involved in the investment. I think, listen, Paul, if I were to précis the point I think you're making is, there doesn't seem to have been any risk involved for any of these companies that were receiving enormous contracts, does there?
No risk at all.
Which means that the margin should be tiny. If there's no risk, the margin should be tiny. The margin is a reward. The bigger the risk, the bigger the margin. Am I right?
Definitely.
Yeah, well, there it is. Ben's in Manchester. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. I think I'm going to try my best to answer the question why they might have redacted it.
Yeah.
It's only speculation, but
all right.
I think I've worked in public sector procurement for over 8 years now, and when the pandemic came around, like many other procurement departments, we were sort of scrambling to try and find PPE. And some of the time that I spent, we were exhausting local suppliers, trying to get, rely on connections to find people who could provide this PPE. And quite simply, I think I would have had to have declared a conflict of interest if I had awarded a contract to somebody who I was in connection with.
Well, he denies that he had anything to do with the award of the contract, and that, but still, that might explain why it got scrubbed out later. Yeah,
I think because in my circumstance, if I had awarded a contract to a friend and not declared that this person was in some way connected to me, then I would probably face, full penalties of potential jail time. You kind of awarding a contract to somebody who you know.
I understand. Yeah, I don't know that is Sherlock Holmes territory. I think the with respect and gratitude, Ben, thank you. But I can't think of another reason why it would be redacted other than trying to remove from. And this isn't. A lot of you are quite cross with me for being nice about Alex Bourne, but pointing out that I got Matt Hancock himself horribly wrong. But listen, being nice is a cross I'm happy to bear. But that's not his fault, is it? The question and the point you're making is, what reason could there be for removing the name of this company from the contract, except to cover up the fact that it was linked to a fella who had a link with the then Secretary of State for Health?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think that sort of applies with a lot of. I've been keeping a close eye on the Good Law project and some of the work they're doing, and I think it applies right across the board. Priti Patel has had some instances where she had connections and links to contracts.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are questions being asked in that field, and Baroness Maugham, the lingerie. I hope that's not snobbish. The lingerie tycoon also has some interesting questions to answer. But we live in a wonderful, transparent democracy where the current government is absolutely committed to probity, as is everybody. Everybody is committed to probity and integrity and all of those wonderful thing. So I'm sure all of these interesting questions that the Good Law Project continues to ask will be answered sooner rather than later.
Enter the Payzone, touch card. Enter the Payzone, touch card. Touch card.